Uncle Marvin always said Kanan would end up dying alone, with nobody left to miss him, but it was Marvin who never got the chance to see if he was right. This is Power Book 3, Raising Kanan Season 5, Episode 8, and today we're breaking down exactly how Marvin Thomas met his end and why his death might be the most devastating moment this show has ever given us. Let's just sit with it for a second, because this one hurts different. Marvin Thomas is gone, and not in some chaotic shootout with bullets flying everywhere and half the block ducking for cover. No, his death came quiet, personal, almost intimate in the worst way possible. He was inside a church, of all places, when it happened, and before Kanan ever showed up, Marvin had already done something that tells you everything about who he really was underneath all that toughness. He left a briefcase full of cash with the priest, money meant for his daughter jukebox, just in case something happened to him. Think about that for a second. This man knew, on some level, that his time might be running out, and instead of running or hiding or trying to fix things, his first instinct was to make sure his little girl was taken care of. That's not the move of a coward. That's not even the move of a hardened street guy just trying to survive. That's a father protecting his child from beyond the grave, and he did it before his own killer even walked through the door. And then Kanan showed up. Now here's where it gets chilling, because Marvin knew exactly why his nephew was standing in front of him. There was no confusion, no pretending, no trying to talk his way out of it. Marvin looked death in the face, and he didn't blink. Witnesses to this moment, or at least the way it's been described by people close to the show, say Marvin stayed completely calm, almost eerily so. He lit up a cigarette. Casual. Unbothered. Like he was daring the universe to do its worst. And instead of begging, instead of pleading for his life the way you'd expect from somebody who knows they're about to die, Marvin flipped the whole thing on its head. He told Kanan that he was going to see him in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Let that sink in. Even in his final moment, Marvin wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to make sure Kanan would never, ever be free of what he was about to do. That's not fear talking. That's a man who understood exactly what kind of weight he was about to place on his nephew's soul, and he wanted Kanan to carry it forever. Then Marvin did something even more haunting. He told Kanan to just get it over with, before the pastor came back. He basically gave his own killer the green light, like he'd already made peace with how his story was going to end. And Kanan did it. Quick. Decisive. No hesitation, no long dramatic standoff. One shot, and one of the most beloved characters in the entire Power universe was gone. Kanan walked out of that church like it was nothing, like he hadn't just murdered his own blood, and that right there tells you how far gone this kid really is at this point in the story. But here's the thing you have to understand if you want to really get why this hit so hard: this wasn't random. This wasn't Kanan just snapping out of nowhere. This was payback, plain and simple, and the seeds for it were planted a few episodes earlier when Marvin found out the truth about his brother Lou's death. See, for a long stretch of this final season, everybody thought Unique was responsible for what happened to Lou. That was the story. That was the lie that kept the peace, at least on the surface. But Rack knew the real truth the whole time, and she sat on it, because revealing it meant blowing up whatever fragile trust was left holding this family together. Eventually, though, with the war between Rack and Kanan heating up and threatening to spill into her business dealings in Manhattan, Rack made a calculated decision. She told Marvin the truth. Kanan was the one who killed Lou. Not Unique. Kanan. And Marvin did not take that news quietly. This was his brother. His blood. Someone he'd fought for, bled for, and lost sleep over avenging for weeks. So when he found out it was Kanan's bullet that ended Lou's life, Marvin didn't hesitate. He tracked his nephew down and he beat him half to death in his own apartment. Left him bloodied, bruised, barely conscious on the floor. And from what we understand, Marvin was ready to finish the job right then and there. He wanted Kanan dead. The only reason that didn't happen in that moment was because Jukebox stepped in and stopped it before it could go any further. She talked her father down, pulled him back from crossing that line, and in doing so, she unknowingly bought Kanan a little more time to live. Time that Kanan would eventually use to turn the tables completely. So when you watch that final church scene, you have to understand it's not just Kanan being cold and murderous for no reason. This is a direct response to that beatdown. This is Kanan making sure nobody, not even the uncle who practically helped raise him, gets to put hands on him and walk away like nothing happened. And that's what makes this whole thing so tragic, because Marvin wasn't wrong to want revenge for Lou. He wasn't wrong to be furious. But that same fury is exactly what set the wheels in motion for his own death. Now, to really understand why losing Marvin cuts as deep as it does, you have to look at the full picture of who this man became over 5 seasons, because he did not start out as the character fans fell in love with. When we first met Marvin back in the early seasons of Raising Kanan, he was volatile, reckless, a guy who made questionable decisions and often seemed like the least reliable member of the Thomas family. His relationship with his own daughter was rocky for a long time, especially around her identity and who she chose to love. That tension was real, and it was ugly at points, the kind of family conflict that doesn't get fixed with one conversation. But that's exactly what makes his journey so powerful. Marvin didn't stay that guy. Over time, he grew. He adjusted. He owned his mistakes instead of doubling down on them, and by the time we reach this final season, he's become someone who fights just as hard for the people he loves as he once fought against understanding them. That's the version of Marvin who shows up in Season 5, and it's a version defined by loss piling on top of loss. Lulu was gone, killed in a moment of chaos that Marvin didn't even know the real story behind until it was almost too late. Rak, his sister, was consumed by her own war, focused on survival and business and keeping her empire from collapsing, which meant she wasn't exactly present for Marvin the way he needed her to be. Kanan, the nephew he'd tried to guide and protect for years, had completely stopped listening to reason, spiraling further into violence with every passing episode. And Jukebox, his own daughter, was hardening into someone colder, someone closer to the version of herself we know from the original Power series, a woman capable of pulling a trigger without blinking. Marvin was watching his entire world fall apart piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop any of it. People who've spoken with the actor who plays Marvin have described this final chapter of the character using a phrase that sticks with you. He was drowning emotionally. And honestly, once you hear that, you can't unsee it in every scene from this season. Marvin wasn't just reacting to violence around him, he was buried under grief he never got the chance to process. He lost his brother. He watched his family fracture in real time. He knew, deep down, that Kanan was becoming someone dangerous, someone who couldn't be reasoned with anymore, and yet he kept trying anyway. He kept showing up. He kept trying to hold pieces of this family together even as everything around him was falling apart, because that's who Marvin was at his core. Loyal to a fault, even when loyalty cost him everything. And that loyalty is really the through line of his entire arc if you step back and look at it. Marvin wanted to avenge Lulu because family meant something to him. Marvin wanted to protect Jukebox, even when their relationship was strained, because she was his daughter and nothing was going to change that. Marvin kept trying to guide Kanan, kept trying to be some kind of stabilizing presence in that kid's chaotic life, because he genuinely cared, even when Kanan gave him every reason not to. He wasn't perfect. He made plenty of mistakes along the way, some of them big ones. But his heart was never in the wrong place, and that's exactly what makes his death sting so much more than if he'd been some background character we barely knew. Because here's the brutal truth of what Kanan actually did in that church. He didn't just kill an obstacle. He didn't just eliminate a threat standing between him and his goals. He wiped out one of the last people in his entire orbit who was still operating from a place of real, genuine love. Think about everyone left standing around Kanan at this point in the story. Rak is calculating and consumed by her own agenda. Breeze is manipulating him for reasons that still aren't fully clear. The people surrounding Kanan now are mostly people using him, pushing him, steering him toward more violence and more chaos. Marvin was different. Marvin actually loved this kid, flaws and all, and tried to save him from himself more than once. And Kanan repaid that love with a bullet. That's the tragedy sitting underneath all of this. It's not just that a beloved character died. It's that his death represents the final door closing on any version of Kanan that could have been saved. As long as Marvin was alive, there was still somebody in Kanan's life pulling him toward accountability, toward family, toward some shred of humanity. Now that Marvin's gone, there's really nobody left to do that job. Rak is too far gone in her own war to play that role anymore, and honestly, at this point, we have to wonder if she even wants to. So when Kanan pulled that trigger, he wasn't just ending his uncle's life. He was closing off his own last real chance at redemption, whether he realized it in that moment or not. Section 3. So where does all of this leave everybody moving forward, and why does this particular death feel like such a turning point for the entire final season? Well, for starters, Marvin wasn't the only gut punch this episode delivered. In that same stretch of episodes, Jukebox took her own dark turn, taking matters into her own hands and eliminating Snaps and Pop herself, finally avenging what happened to Famous. Two massive losses hitting almost back to back, and it really does feel like the writers made a deliberate choice not to give the audience a single moment to breathe. You lose Marvin, and almost immediately you're watching his daughter step fully into the kind of cold, calculated violence that defines her character in the original Power timeline. It's like watching two dominoes fall in the same motion, and you can't help but wonder how much of Jukebox's transformation was already inevitable, and how much of it just got accelerated the moment her father was taken from her. And that's really where the biggest question mark of this whole storyline comes in. Jukebox does not know yet that Kanan is the one who killed her father. She doesn't know it was his hand that pulled that trigger inside that church. But if you know anything about where this character ends up in the future timeline of the Power universe, you know Jukebox becomes someone who doesn't forgive easily, someone who holds on to pain and turns it into purpose. So the moment she finds out the truth, and let's be honest, in a show like this, that truth almost always comes out eventually, everything changes. The idea of Jukebox and Kanan ever being close again, ever trusting each other, ever operating as some kind of family unit, becomes almost impossible to imagine. This is a woman who just avenged one father figure in Famous. There's no version of her that sits back and does nothing once she learns Kanan took her actual father away from her too. What makes this even harder to watch is thinking about where Marvin started compared to where he ended. This was a guy who spent early seasons making reckless calls, struggling to be the father and brother his family actually needed, constantly caught between the streets and the people he loved. But by the time we reach these final episodes, he had grown into someone who fought fiercely for his daughter, who stood by his family even when it cost him everything, who tried, again and again, to be a stabilizing force in a world that kept pulling everyone toward destruction. He wasn't a perfect man. He never claimed to be. But he was trying, right up until his very last moment, and that effort is exactly what made him one of the most genuinely loved characters in this entire franchise. And that's part of why this hits so hard for longtime fans. Marvin gave us some of the funniest, most human moments this show has ever had. He gave us heartbreak too, watching him struggle to accept his daughter, then watching him grow enough to stand beside her unconditionally. He gave us loyalty, throwing himself into danger for his brother, for his sister, for people who didn't always deserve that level of devotion. Across 5 seasons, Marvin Thomas became more than just a supporting character in Kanan's origin story. He became the emotional center of this entire family, the one person who somehow managed to hold onto his humanity even while living a life built on violence and survival. Losing that kind of character isn't just a plot twist. It's losing a piece of what made this show feel human in the first place. Now, looking ahead, everything points toward Rack and Kanan finally colliding in the kind of full-blown confrontation this entire season has been building toward. Marvin's death only adds more fuel to that fire, especially once the fallout with Jukebox and the truth about Lou finally comes crashing down. Breeze is already stirring things up on his own end, working an agenda that seems to be pushing Kanan even further toward chaos, and it's hard to imagine this family finding any kind of peace after everything that's happened. Too much blood has already been spilled between these people for there to be any clean resolution left. Whatever happens next, it feels like the show is racing toward an ending where almost nobody walks away unscarred, and honestly, after watching Marvin go out the way he did, that feels like exactly where this story needed to head. At the end of the day, what makes Marvin's death so unforgettable isn't just the shock of losing him, it's everything that death represents. It's the closing of a door that can never be reopened. It's the final piece of proof that Kanan has fully become someone capable of turning on the people who loved him most, without hesitation, without remorse. And it's a reminder that in this world, loyalty and love don't protect you from anything. If anything, they make you a target. Marvin spent his entire arc trying to hold his family together, trying to be better than the life he was born into, and in the end, that same family is exactly what destroyed him. There's something deeply tragic about that, something that's going to sit with fans of this show for a long time. So that's the full breakdown of what really happened to Marvin, why Kanan pulled that trigger, and what it means for everyone left standing in this final season. Down in the comments, I want to hear from you. Did you see Marvin's death coming, or did it catch you completely off guard? Do you think Jukebox will ever find out the truth about what Kanan did? And honestly, do you think there's any redemption left for Kanan at this point, or has he crossed a line that can't be walked back? Drop your thoughts below, because this conversation is far from over. If this breakdown helped you make sense of everything going on in Raising Kanan Season 5, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown the moment new episodes drop. There's a lot more heartbreak coming before this season is over, and you're going to want to be here for every second of it.